Go ahead and hit record. Welcome to today's Illinois Extension Local Government Education webinar. We're hosting Matt Schmidt from the Illinois Office of Broadband to present about the Digital Navigator program, which is a capacity building initiative that can support community digital equity needs. And a link will be posted in the chat box for that. For sound quality, microphones are going to be muted, but you're all encouraged to utilize the chat space to ask any questions at any time during Matt's presentation. If you're having technical issues, please enter those questions in as well, or direct message me if you're having difficulties. After today's presentation, I'll be sending a follow-up email to those who've registered for today's session with slides and handouts and the recording. And if you know you did not register for today's session and you're just jumping on the call, you can direct message me as well with your email address, and I'll make sure to include you in that follow-up email. So I just want to say thank you again to Matt for being here today with this important information, and I'll hand it over to you now.
Well, thank you so much, Nancy, and again to you and your colleagues at University of Illinois Extension for helping us put forward this webinar series. We really love the programming that we're developing around our infrastructure and digital equity package, and I think communicating that to potential applicants is well, it's a big part of the program. And so thank you for making this relatively easy. And so today we were really excited to share with you our Digital Navigator program that we think adds a lot of value to what we're doing here at the Illinois Office of Broadband. This is something that we wanted to do before the pandemic, but I think the call and the urgency for this sort of work and this sort of resource is doubly important today. And so I'm really excited to share this opportunity with folks, and we hope you get a lot from our time together here today. And certainly if there are any questions after the fact, don't hesitate to reach out. I always make this disclaimer at the front end of a webinar that we offer these because we want to bring to life the programming that we offer. And I try to do it in a way that makes, I think, connections to what you do in your day-to-day life and brings this to you in real terms. If anything I say, though, is contradictory to the notice of collaboration opportunity or other documentation, I always refer back to those documents for the final word on things. I don't try to contradict myself, but hey, it might happen. And so those documents have it right. So with that said, I think, Nancy, we can advance to the next slide. And we can start talking a little bit about, how this program fits into our broader offerings. Connect Illinois made a big splash about a year ago with the nation's leading state matching grant program, Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program at $400 million. It is the biggest such program ever in the country. And we're currently in round 2 of that infrastructure funding. And so there's probably a lot of interest in that infrastructure program. This webinar is not about that. If you're interested in that program, though, there is content available online, and we certainly encourage you to check that out. But today's piece is about a specific aspect of our digital equity program that was announced a couple of weeks back. And we've taken turns running through the different programs that we have that represent, our first attempt at standing up a strong digital equity platform. The first here, the Digital Navigator program. We'll talk a little bit more detail about that in the coming slides. We have our Broadband Ready grant program, which we also will preview here today in short. And then our Illinois Connected Communities program that operates at the neighborhood or community level. And the whole idea here is that we want to round out our activity so that it's complementary and so that truly, the sum of its parts is greater than, well, I guess what's the saying? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That this complementary work adds value and reinforces what we're trying to accomplish. And so the next slide here, we're going to provide a little bit more detail on the Connected Communities program. We have a second round of funding available. We have our first round activity underway right now. In this program, we have spent a lot of time in a previous webinar talking about. I wanted to remind folks that this is an opportunity for communities that are interested in local broadband planning and capacity building. They want to organize around the creation of a broadband strategic plan, are interested in leveraging some seed funding up to $15,000 per community to think through a holistic approach to addressing some broadband needs around access, adoption, and utilization. And there's a real opportunity with this program, as with others, in collaborating with our statewide computer refurbishing and redistribution network. And of course, this program that we're going to talk about today, our Digital Navigator capacity. And so the application deadline for Connected Communities is January 25th of 2021. If you want more information, you can find it both in webinar content, and also the notice of funding opportunity on our website. And so Nancy, the next slide is going to tell you a little bit more information about our Broadband Ready program, which is similar in some regards to that Connected Communities program, but it's designed to operate at the regional level. And READY is an acronym for Regional Engagement for Adoption and Digital Equity. I always joke, I do take a liberty with that Y at the end here, but it was just too close and too punchy to avoid. So Broadband Ready, the idea here is to add some context and contour to our understanding about current conditions and opportunities in broadband access, adoption, affordability, and utilization on the regional level. We've invested significantly in getting better mapping for the state of Illinois, and that mapping is going to be available to us and to you in February, March of 2021. But we don't want the mapping itself to be the end of the story. We want to have a much better understanding about what's working and where there are opportunities for collaboration and investment on other fronts of the broadband conversation. And that's a big goal of the Broadband Ready program. Again, operating at the regional level. We have had some separate content and resources available online for this program. That application closes up fairly quickly here, December 23rd. But if folks are interested in learning more about that program, again, the whole idea is to integrate our Digital Navigator program today with our Broadband Ready program and our Connected Communities program. And so the next slide will get us to the main event for today, and that's our Digital Navigator program. And I think folks who are joining us today may have a question, what's a Digital Navigator and what are you talking about here, Matt? Well, the idea here is that we understand that there are a lot of resources that are available to the public, whether they're local, regional, state, or even federal, that the landscape for understanding those resources and how to connect to the internet, how to build your skills, how to utilize it to maximum benefit. Well, there may be more questions than answers among a lot of community members around the state. And so we want to develop a capacity that by definition is responsive to local interest, reflective of local resources, that feeds into a larger statewide network. And we're calling this our Digital Navigator Network. And we're going to spend some time talking about what that may entail here for Illinois. But this initial notice of collaboration opportunity that we're announcing, here today, or not, well, we've announced it already, but the application closes January 11th of 2021. It's a relatively straightforward application process that we'll spend some time on the back end of our slide deck here today talking about. But communities aren't given a grant per se. They are applying to partner with the State Office of Broadband and the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, which we'll hear more about in a moment, to take advantage of training and an intentional process to identify and map digital inequities at the local level, to identify digital inclusion assets, and then also to identify digital inclusion program gaps. And the idea, by doing that, we're also able to put our finger on resources that are available, whether it's provider choice in a given community, opportunities for enrolling in free or reduced cost broadband service,
Nancy, we've lost Matt on the sound.
Yeah.
So it looks like, Matt, you are not muted, but we don't hear your sound. If you look in the chat box, I have put in the call-in information. If you wanted to call in by phone and continue to speak, and you would probably want to open up your slide deck on your own computer and call in with that call-in number.
And Nancy and everybody, can you hear me?
Oh, yep.
Sorry
Great.
about that. The technology is failing at every turn these days, but we were able to recognize it pretty quickly there. In any event, the point is, I think this is a good point of departure for me and to introduce our colleagues at the National Digital Inclusion Alliance who are joining us today. And so with that said, the next slide is a transition into that resource. And well, I guess before we get there, well, this is the transition slide. We have some program partners, PCs for People, our computer refurbishing and redistribution network that we talked about, and also the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. Really pleased to be joined today by Angela Seifer, the Executive Director of NDIA, and also the manager of programs and data, Paulo Balboa. And with that said, I'd just like to invite Angela and Paulo to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about NDIA and in your approach to digital equity and inclusion. We're so thrilled to have you as a strategic partner for the state of Illinois in our Office of Broadband, and to launch this program in partnership with you. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. We are super excited to be doing this with you. I'm Angela Seifer. I'm the Executive Director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I live in Columbus, Ohio. NDIA is about 6 years old. We got started because there wasn't an entity representing local digital inclusion work. So we're now that place where there's a lot of peer-to-peer networking and sharing, but then also we do the advocacy and policy work. I'm going to let Paulo get into what digital inclusion is and what digital navigators is. Just real quick, our role in this is that we have been helping others with digital navigator programs, and we are thrilled to figure that out with you all also. In this moment, in this pandemic moment that we are in, more and more folks are having to do digital inclusion work in order to meet their other needs and mission of their organizations. So we think partnering with the state of Illinois is a perfect way to help more folks get to that digital inclusion work. And I'm going to turn it over to Paulo.
Thanks, Angela. Hi, everyone. My name is Paulo Balboa, the Programs and Data Manager with NDIA. I live in Brooklyn, New York. So the next slide, I think, helps frame and contextualize digital navigators, how it came up, why it came up, and functionally how it's working out in the field today. So digital navigators came up in response to COVID, when everyone who was doing what we call this sort of digital inclusion work had to suddenly shift their programs to a more remote setting. So on this slide, we're looking at first framing what is digital equity. That's the digital equity is like the goal, right? Digital equity is like the framework in which folks have the capacity for full participation in society, democracy, and the economy. What that means in layman's terms is that this was a big year for civic participation, whether we were getting folks signed up for the census or registering to vote for the first time online, right? Those they always were available to complete online. But now, in a year where we all have to stay at home and the need to connect on the internet is more important now more than ever, digital navigators came up as a place to fill that gap. Functionally, organizations such as public libraries and community-based organizations that may have maybe like a public computer lab, they have usually been the folks to step into this role and help usually adults understand how to use and navigate the internet. What we're doing with digital navigators is looking over to this right side of the slide under digital inclusion. We're emphasizing the digital literacy and tech support component of these activities necessary for full participation to get to a space of digital equity. So another way of saying this is that while it is important to get folks connected to reliable home broadband, and it is also important that they have a device to access the internet, what happens if they don't know how to use those devices, right? It's not enough simply to give out a Chromebook or give out a tablet to a community member. If they don't know how to use it, if they don't know how to access the resources on the internet that allow for this full participation in society, democracy, and the economy. So this is where Digital Navigator steps in. The next slide gives a bit of an outline of the types of people that are being hired on as digital navigators in existing programs. After this slide, which we don't have a relevant slide, I'll be happy to talk about how Digital Navigators is getting off the ground in its different iterations across the country. But right now, Digital Navigators are volunteers and staff at community-based organizations. Think of people like AmeriCorps volunteers or Peace Corps volunteers. They're digital equity resource guides. So as Matt was saying in his intro, a digital navigator understands the local digital equity ecosystem of their community, whether that means that they have knowledge of free and low cost internet offers in their area, or how to connect to an organization like PCs for People to get a community member set up with a device. A digital navigator is a researcher in their community. They know the best resources for their community members, and they can help point people in the right direction. What this looks like is, again, like my background is in libraries. So when I try to conceptualize what a digital navigator is, it's a librarian who has that empathy key. They have a conversational piece to be able to, in this case, speak with someone remotely over the phone and sort of act as that guide, that tech support to first figure out what a community member's need is. And also realizing that a community member may not have the language or the capacity to describe their need as well, right? A digital navigator tries to help them figure out what it is they actually need and then helping them get connected with those resources. So on the ground, Digital Navigators has taken on a few different iterations. And for us, that's great, right? That's sort of the point. We want this to be a replicable model that anywhere and anyone across the nation can access, figure out, and apply in their own context. So we're still in the piloting phase of a few programs, but for instance, in August, NDIA worked with an organization called the Local Initiatives Support Corporation, LISC. The emphasis on that program was to work with rural communities in Appalachia. So in Southern Ohio, West Virginia, Western Virginia, and the Carolinas, Rural LISC identified 6 sites that focused on economic development in their communities. So in that case, NDIA worked with those individual 9 sites, went through a training in which we described what Digital Navigators is, what this work looks like, and how they can execute it, so then they can be a better resource for their communities. NDIA took what we learned from that initial pilot with Rural LISC and then applied it to another program with the Salt Lake City Public Library. So the Salt Lake City Public Library got federal funds from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and we're adapting what we learned and figuring out what worked, what didn't work with that first LISC, Rural LISC program, and applying it with folks in the Salt Lake City area. The Salt Lake City Public Library had identified 3 other community-based organizations that serve primarily Latino and economically distressed populations, so that they were able to hire on digital navigators to, again, work as better resource guides for their communities. The last existing and ongoing program now is a workforce development iteration of digital navigators that is based in Ohio and that focuses on adults 55 and older. So once again, as myself and my colleagues at NDIA and our larger community of practice are figuring out what works and what doesn't work, we're now adapting what works there with this workforce development program in Ohio. That program is particularly interesting because this is our first time working actively with device refurbishers such as PCs for People and other national refurbishers to get them connected with our client in Ohio, right? Because one of the interesting things about the past 9 or so months is that there are so many new faces and so many new organizations to this digital equity space that, as Angela was saying, they can't really complete the mission of their organization unless they address this digital equity piece. So a client like the Workforce Development Agency in Ohio now has to navigate this digital sphere. So we're doing a lot of this. We're helping them get connected with refurbishers, get connected with ISPs, and helping guide them towards a decision that works best for them and their program. So that's like the large overview. I can keep yabbering away. I can talk about this all day, but I'll just pause there and not take up too much space and send it back to Matt. I'm happy to do like a Q&A here as well, if that makes sense. Angela, did you want to add anything?
The only thing I would add is that NDIA is an affiliate-based network. It's free to join. So if you are new to figuring out digital inclusion, welcome in, right? We'll put the join link in the chat. We are a peer-to-peer network. So if you are new to this field, in fact, we have a 101 webinar coming up next week. We'll share that in here also. So if you are new to digital inclusion, we, even without getting the agreement from, being part of the state of Illinois' broadband project, you can also just join the community.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Angela and Paulo. And Nancy, I think at any stage in the game here, if there are any questions, I'm trying to follow the chat box, but I think please feel free to interject with any questions and pose them to us. Otherwise, we wanted to take a moment, I think, to get into the actual application a little bit and help folks understand how to get from point A today, a better understanding of what digital navigators are, to becoming a member of our initial cohort with the Digital Navigator program. And so, as I always like to do, I like to direct folks to our Connect Illinois website, just because so many resources that we make available are located right there, our attempt to have a complete one-stop shop for all things broadband in Illinois. But again, if there are any questions that would be helpful for folks to get a better understanding of kind of the digital navigator concept, we certainly can interject at any point here in these slides. But as you can see with our Connect Illinois website, we've got a pretty thorough vertical menu of options here that talks about our program, our strategic plan. We talk about access to free and reduced cost broadband. But as you scroll down, and the next slide will take you to this, you'll see our digital equity grants, our broadband grants. And for today's purposes, you can see the links to our connected communities, both round 1 and round 2 in that upper right-hand corner here, as well as our our Navigator NOCO. We're calling it a notice of collaboration opportunity, because what you're applying for essentially is the training and not necessarily a grant. And you'll also see the Broadband Ready notice of funding opportunity before that or after that, and then also a link to our webinars that we host. And so this is our kind of one-stop shop here for the digital equity programming and related materials. And if anybody's on this call that you're interested in our broadband infrastructure grants, you can scroll down and get more information regarding that opportunity. So now the next slide will take you into what that Navigator NOCO, that notice of collaboration opportunity, looks like. And so on the screen here today, this is taken right out of that notice of collaboration opportunity document. And so if you've already opened that up, this should look familiar. The application period opened back in November. It will close on January 11th. We know that's right around the corner, especially with the holidays ahead of us. But the good news is we think the application process, it should be fairly user-friendly. And so we wouldn't advise waiting until the last day, but we do tend to get a lot of our applications for our programs within the last few days of an application process. And so if you haven't started thinking about this yet, I don't think you're too far behind the 8 ball, but I would start thinking about how you might be able to put your best foot forward in terms of preparing an application. And so the next few slides here, we'd like to just bring to life the program itself a little bit more. Hopefully we all have a little bit better understanding about what a digital navigator is and what we're trying to accomplish. We do have some definitions here. I'm not going to read through each one of these, but those of us in the broadband community, so to speak, we throw around terms like broadband access and broadband adoption and broadband utilization pretty freely. And I know that I'm guilty as charged of that here just on our time together on the webinar. But we've got some fairly specific definitions around, what we mean by access or adoption or utilization. And I just want to reference folks to this. We tend to put these definitions in our notice of funding opportunity, documents and related materials so that you can reference these. I wanted to include them for today's purposes as well. Just a note, I guess I would say here, though, if you're looking at this and you see broadband access and you see that 25/3 megabits per second, broadband definition referenced, by no means consider that to be, fully adequate broadband in the 21st century here, in certainly the year 2020, but rather a benchmark established by the Federal Communications Commission defining basic broadband. And so that's one of our goals in Illinois, is to make sure every home, business, community, anchor institution around the state has access at that very basic level. But our goals go much beyond that, in making sure that communities and folks in every corner of the state have access to the kind of broadband that's high quality, that's reliable, that's affordable on an ongoing basis moving forward. And so just want to emphasize that point. And again, you can spend some time seeing more about the definitions around adoption and utilization. The next slide, as you had a chance to see, gets into some more definitions around public computing and public access. That's something that's been made, incredibly important under the pandemic with remote learning or telehealth or working from home, making sure that folks have access to connectivity. Ideally, everybody has access to it in their homes. And of course, that's a stated goal of our Connect Illinois program. But in the short term, that's not the case, and that's not a possibility for everybody. And so we want to do what we can to invest in and emphasize public computing. And it used to be that would be taking place in a physical setting. I think nowadays you can get that in various ways through public Wi-Fi, through mobile hotspot loaner programs. The whole idea here is we want that community technology to be pervasive as well. And then we talk a little bit about our Connect Illinois Digital Navigator Network. Of course, that's what we're on the webinar here today to talk about. By design and definition, we're not talking about one-off opportunities in individual communities, but rather how those resources tie together to form regional and statewide networks that add value to the whole. And then finally, we talk a little bit about our Connect Illinois statewide computer refurbishing network. It's been referenced a couple times already here today, but the whole idea is that connectivity is only part of that digital divide. We have to focus on making sure that folks have access to devices and computers, as well as the kind of digital literacy and training that really is inherent to this Digital Navigator program. And so now moving on into the next slide, we get into more of the meat of the notice of collaboration opportunity itself. We have a program description. I'm sorry for all the text in front of you, but rather than walk through a document that is our notice of collaboration opportunity, we've put some of the text in front of you here. And so this should look familiar if you've seen the document before. But again, we take some time to talk about the importance of this kind of investment, the kind of work that we'd like to do through it, and then also we make reference to these terms that we throw around: digital navigation, digital equity. Moving on into the next slide, digital inclusion, and the kinds of work that we anticipate doing, identifying and mapping those inequities, looking at digital inclusion assets that are available at that community or regional or statewide level, and then also looking at where there are programming gaps and how we can fill those. And so that really, again, is the thrust of this program, is trying to bring some intentionality and resources and focus to filling those gaps. And so moving on to the next slide, you see a little bit more description about the kind of work that we're going to be doing here. And again, it begins with asset mapping and understanding and identifying what sorts of resources are available at that local level, and then putting together essentially a slate of, and that's that ecosystem that Paolo and Angela had spoken of earlier, in putting together that slate of resources and training and digital skills building and the components of digital literacy that are so important to, I think, successfully navigating and utilizing the internet here in the 21st century. And so we have a little bit of information in the NOFO itself about the funding opportunity and the information regarding this opportunity. There's no monetary grant with this notice of collaboration opportunity, but rather, again, emphasizing for folks, it is a training opportunity, and that we hope to build a network that we can reinvest in down the road through skills, not only building, but maintenance. And so as we identify and grow the resources that are available to our individual communities, that's a message that's conveyed to our network of navigators on a fairly regular basis moving forward. And so moving ahead into the next slide, we get into the conversation a little bit more. All right. right, eligible applicants. We really wanted to make this open to any organization or entity that would be willing to make available essentially the time of an employee, or maybe somebody who's a super volunteer or otherwise affiliated with a nonprofit organization or a similar organization. And so just to be clear, what we're talking about here is we are asking an applicant to make available time. And I see a question pop up, how much time? And I think that's really a question about, what you anticipate to be the needs of your communities. I think it used to be that, for instance, librarians might serve as a role of a digital navigator in a physical setting where patrons would go and use that public computing center for accessing the internet, and that librarian would be the single source of all sorts of information that goes well beyond books. And I think in this setting, and certainly this is true in the a pandemic and post-pandemic world, we want to be able to have a virtual resource that's available to folks in a non-physical setting. And so as an applicant thinks about defining his or her, or their community, in what sorts of resources and time might be needed to meet the needs of, the community members, I think we want to try to put our finger on a good match there. And so we're not talking about full-time devoted to this cause. I think, certainly a set of hours a week, and you go through that initial training. And again, that's what you're applying for, is that ability to work with the Office of Broadband, with NDIA and other partners to identify those resources, to establish that training protocol, and to be able to position yourself, your organization, your community as a resource of its own for those who are interested in learning more information, and again, accessing navigation resources. And so we talk a little bit about our content in the form of application. A lot of the applications that we receive come to us via email or electronic submission. So I say this a lot in our webinars. broadband@illinois.gov is a great kind of catch-all for any inquiries or correspondence you'd like to send to our office. It's an email account I check regularly, and our full staff has access to that. So broadband@illinois.gov. We also will take paper copy submission, of course, as well. And quickly here at the bottom, what we're asking for a full application, a cover letter essentially articulating your desire for participating in the program and why you want to be a member of our initial Digital Navigator cohort. We ask for some specific application information that we'll take some time exploring here in a moment. And then in addition to that, we have a uniform application that will soon to be posted on the website as well, just asking for some basic information like points of contact, the personnel that's involved, and then just some standard Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity disclosure forms as well. And so when it's all said and done, it's a fairly straightforward process. And the whole idea here, as we move to the next slide, is for us to get a better understanding of your need, of your vision for how a digital navigator fits in to your community, your organization, and the level of commitment that you think that you can make to having this person or these individuals available to go through training and in turn serve as a resource to those around you. And so you follow through here. We have a merit review process that DCEO, Department of Commerce Economic Opportunity, utilizes for all of its grant programs. And so we will have a competitive process for reviewing applications that come to us. We will like to achieve some semblance of geographic balance around the state. After all, the idea here is to set up a statewide network. And so we would like to have resources available throughout the state upon which to build. Moving down into the evaluation criteria itself, I think I spoke to that level of commitment and I guess the appropriate skills of that lead organization, which would be the applicant in this case, to house a digital navigator, one or more. I think we're open to the idea of having a team of navigators be included in a single application. I think the idea here is for us to be able to achieve some semblance of efficiency as we're working with that individual applicant turned grantee through the resource identification, that ecosystem work, and then the training itself. And then also we want to be able to ascertain a commitment for that grantee to be actively engaged in multiple training sessions and program sponsored online events over the program period. And we expect that this is going to be fairly intense for a matter of the initial few months, and that there will be, regular touch points thereafter where we are able to, share findings from other parts of the state, update the resources that are available to a given community or organization. And so the idea here is that it's not a quick training and we're done with you and never see you again, but rather we start a longer relationship, certainly with the Office of Broadband and hopefully a long-term strategic partner with NDIA here to develop this capacity and continue to nurture it. And so again, I don't want to give anyone the impression that this is going to be time, consuming of your work week at any juncture. That's certainly not the case. But the point is, there's an expectation that if you apply to be a member of our Digital Navigator cohort, that you're going to be spending some time on the front end, going through the training, helping us uncover resources at the local level, and then staying in touch with us moving forward. So that kind of speaks to the first two of these overall criteria. The third one, the level of demonstrated support from the community organizations. And so I think this really gets at the question of the need and also the readiness of this digital navigator or the team of digital navigators at the local level to do good for the community. And so if you have a community that's engaged, that recognizes the need for this sort of capacity and is willing to demonstrate it in a personalized letter of support, for instance, that really speaks volumes to how integrated we think this resource is going to be in that community and really the level of good that it can do. And then, finally, we talk a little bit about the level of demonstrated need for broadband adoption or utilization. Again, we have that three-legged stool that I always talk about: broadband access, adoption, utilization. You kind of see it presented in different ways here. But the idea is we'd like to get a good sense of the challenges that your community is facing on the broadband front, so to speak, just to make sure that we are, investing our resources on an equitable basis, and we're matching, our scarce programming and resources in a way that does target resource to need. And so that kind of the four big pieces of the application, how we're looking at evaluating them. The next slide will get into the application itself a little bit, and I'll spare you of reading through it line by line. But you can certainly use this as a reference, and if there are any questions, we can come back to this and spend some time on this. But of course, all of this is taken straight from the NOFO or the NOCO, the Notice of Collaboration Opportunity itself. But obviously, in one, you see the cover letter that introduces the applicant and the community. It makes that clear connection between this program and the community's need and the vision for what you hope to get out of participation in this program. And then we get into some more detailed application or applicant information in the second part of the application. And then moving on to the next slide, you can see community description. We want to get a good understanding of your community, the expected program impact that you envision this having on your community. And then again, getting into that point about the description of the supporting organizations that you think, if they're not a lead applicant, how they will benefit from this. And so with that said, I think we've got one more slide here. I think it's important for us to open it up for questions here, and that's what we're getting to. And so we can bounce around back to any other slides in the webinar here, but the whole idea for us today is to answer any questions that you might have about the Digital Navigator concept, how we see it fitting in with other resources that we've made available in Illinois on the broadband front, and for those of you who are interested, how you can take that next step in getting an application to us. And so with that said, thank you for everyone's attention, for bearing with us on the technical difficulties. And if there are any questions, Nancy, I guess I'll leave it to you to pose them to us.
Thanks, Matt. We had some questions come through already during your presentation, and I just want to encourage everybody to continue to put questions in the chat box now during this Q&A as you think about it, whether it be for Matt or it be for the two guest speakers that we had today, Paolo and Angela. I am not sure if she's still on the line or not, but we have, of course, Paolo, who is going to rep NDIA. So any questions for Matt or Paolo are welcome at this time. The first question came across pretty close off the bat and was, can this and other Connect Illinois digital equity programs be dovetailed with that round 2 of the infrastructure grant program?
Yeah, I think there's certainly an opening here for an applicant to speak holistically about how they see infrastructure and adoption and utilization fitting together. I don't want to give anyone the impression though that that it's required of an applicant to make those connections. You know, we recognize that communities around the state are at different points in kind of their, you know, I guess their broadband, you know, visioning or investment or making, you know, their community competitive on the broadband front. And sometimes that requires, you know, further investment in infrastructure and making sure folks have the connectivity to the internet that's necessary in the year 2020 and beyond. In other times, it's a matter of kind of looking at, you know, perhaps making sure that we're leveraging, you know, device programs or getting access to computers to fill that aspect of the digital divide. Likewise, adoption, maybe looking at affordability programs and emphasizing how we're able to take advantage of those to maximum benefit for a community. And then you get into the whole utilization question about, all right, we've got access to the internet, and perhaps in some areas it's truly great. How do you use that to maximum end to help your community and community members thrive? And so that's just kind of a quick, I guess, reiteration of how we kind of view the broader landscape here. With the Digital Navigator program, you know, we're trying to strike that balance between identifying I think the strengths and the weaknesses of a given region on the broadband front, you know, and also providing that resourcing for digital literacy skill building. And so in helping the community take advantage of those resources that are available. And so I guess if I were to leave, you know, our you know, participants here with an impression, it's just, don't overthink this. I mean, if you're in a position where your community could benefit from having a digital navigator capacity, you know, I think try to keep it simple so that you're looking at, you know, the community, you know, as we kind of talked through those aspects of the application and the scoring process, you know, the community's need, where you are on that spectrum, I think, of broadband and the different ways we look at it, what kind of community involvement you have, and in how successful we think a digital navigator would be in a community, you know, how much benefit is it providing for community members, and how much support you get from partner organizations in the community. And so I think if there are connections that can be made to our infrastructure program, for instance, the Connect Illinois Broadband Grant Program, great. But I would say that, you know, this is really designed to help those communities that might be at a different point in terms of trying to just establish, you know, resources for their community to better understand what they have and utilize what they have. And sorry, I can try to be a little bit more succinct in my answers here. There's not a perfect answer to that question, and hopefully I did justice to it.
Very good. Yeah, that's great. And we have, you know, time. I think that even, you know, at 2:30 or whatever, even if we've been on for an hour, we don't have to stop. We can make sure that we get all the questions answered, and then we can have that recording there with all the questions answered. That is, if you're available, Matt, to continue, if Paolo's available to stay on a little bit after 2:30, if we must do that. So the next question is just that wanting to know about the community organizations that can apply for the Digital Navigator collaboration opportunity, and do they have to be 501c3 or can others who are not also apply?
I think the short answer is no. I mean, we've been intentional about having I guess, an inviting kind of approach to the organizations that we would partner with. And so the key here is that the organization is willing to make available one of its, you know, personnel resources, one or more, to go through the training and then be available to the community to help basically share that expertise that you know, that is developed.
And so there was just an additional question about wanting to make sure that organizations versus individuals can either apply. If you want to speak to that, I know there was some language in the slide there, and if you wanted to just reiterate.
I think this is designed for a partnership between the Office of Broadband, well, among the Office of Broadband, NDIA, and an organization. And so I think it's best for organizations to serve as applicants. However, we understand that some organizations might be more formal than others, and if there's a relationship between an individual and an organization that is more of a volunteer nature, certainly open to that kind of approach coming to us. I think it's probably a better approach for this first round for us to focus on establishing a formal relationship with an organization as our applicant, if that makes sense and if that gets at that question.
I think it does, yeah. How many hours of training? We had a participant ask.
Yeah, we're working through that right now. I mean, this is the first time that we're doing this, and so I think that remains to be seen what that looks like. I don't think it's going to be the kind of training that takes up a significant portion of anybody's week in any part. I mean, I envision something by way of like 10 hours max. But Paulo, I know that you're doing a lot of program development, and this is kind of a new sort of approach that we're undertaking here. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I mean, if you'd like to speak to approaches that have been taken in other states or projects that you've worked on that you find successful, please don't hold us to this number, because I think we want to go through this and make sure that we're investing, what's necessary to make this meaningful. And so there's going to be a little flexibility in terms of, what that training looks like, but we want it to be thorough, both in uncovering the resources that are available at that local level, identifying those gaps, and also leaving the navigators with the resources and the know-how they have to essentially be a resource for their community.
And I can add on to that as well, Matt. Like as you were saying, like this is a new sort of iteration of this Digital Navigators project for us. So the training the training is always going to be tailored to each site, depending, like we want to meet folks like where they are in their understanding and knowledge base. But for instance, just to give you an example of how Digital Navigators is working elsewhere, in the Salt Lake City Public Library project, they had allotted out 20 hours of training. 5 of those hours took place over the course of a week, in which each day there was 1 hour long like actual training, like a webinar in which all the digital navigators tune in. There's a slide deck, there's activities, and there's skill sharing. So that was the only instance in which like folks had to be somewhere. But the other 15 hours were hours that we were allotting out as what we were describing as homework. So like what you were describing, Matt, in which like the point at which digital navigators are doing their own research to map out local resources for devices, local digital equity resources. We're allotting out that sort of like independent study time for digital navigators to research their communities and then to put together documents to share with a larger group.
So I think for our program, one thing that we want to be intentional about is balancing that training on the front end with the regular and consistent touch points thereafter to kind of keep the skills maintained and fresh. And so that's why we hesitate to put a firm number on the number of hours. But I mean, I think we're looking certainly 10 hours plus and a thorough training resource, landscaping effort on the front end. And so those 10 hours are not all going to happen in any one week, though. And so it's going to be spread out. I see a question just pop up. When does this start? Fortunately, we do have an opportunity, I think, to tailor the schedule somewhat to the applicant's preference as well. I think with this, we would have, cohort-wide launch and then, some cohort-wide meetings or touch points throughout the course of the process. But then a lot of the work will be focused solely on kind of one-on-one engagement with individual navigators or grantees, if you will. And so there's some flexibility on that front.
Thanks. And since you just spoke to this, I'll jump to the second part of the question, which wants to clarify if it's going to be fully virtual or is there an in-person aspect?
Yeah, I think given the pandemic and our desire to build this resource and launch this program, I think that the safe assumption is that everything will be virtual to start out with. I'm not sure down the road, if on the other end of this, these challenging times, if we have an opportunity for having gatherings where we are able to build on our resources and our initial training. I'm certainly open to that, but I don't think I'll just say that right now. This is not in-person convenings in gatherings will not be, a requisite for participation in this program.
Thanks. We had a question earlier about the Broadband Ready NOFO, talking of the already announced digital equity grant, that Ready NOFO, and it was answered in the chat. Thanks, Casey, for posting that link that explained what types of organizations can apply. But then it drove another question to the chat box about the Ready grant, which was wanting to know the number of grants that are available for that. And then, of course, we can pop back to the Digital
Sure.
Navigator
Sure.
questions.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of overview all of the three grant programs or the three programs that we have, open for application right now. With our Illinois Connected Communities, we have an initial cohort of 12 communities. I think 10 to 12 communities for the Illinois Connected Community program is about right, 10 to 12. Likely for round two. For our Broadband Ready program, we are very specific in dividing the state's 10 regions that are identified through economic development channels into two cohorts of 5 each. And so the Broadband Ready program seeks to identify 5 initial, regions to work with on the front end for the first tranche, and then the other 5 regions down the road. And with that program, there's not kind of a preset or ideal applicant necessarily. It just has to be an applicant that's positioned well to do good work at the regional level and really focus on the whole region and not just a subset of that region. And then when we get to the Digital Navigator program, this is, again, we're developing this as we go here. And so that's what makes us exciting. My hope with the Digital Navigator program is that we're able to put our finger on 10 to 20 communities throughout the state for our initial cohort. And it's a pretty broad range because I think we just want to make sure that we have that right number that's complementary in terms of, I think, readiness, of fit, of geographic balance. And so I would love to have that be on the high end of that, but I think it's just important that we have that right fit. And my hope is that this program with the Digital Navigators is such a success that we're able to come out with a second round in the short term here.
Thanks. What's a suggested web-based program that would allow someone to share someone's screen so that you can offer virtual help?
We have
and I don't know if that is, I think, go ahead, Matt. I don't want to assume what the question's about. So if you go ahead.
I think they're talking about kind of platforms for connecting much as we are today. And so you have Zoom or WebEx or any, Teams or any number of different options for doing that. I'll just say this, I think at this stage in our program development, I don't think that we're necessarily married to any one platform at this stage. I think the idea is that, that eventually that we would have, that kind of capacity built in for all of our navigators. I don't necessarily know that, I'll just say this, I don't think that we have to have an applicant coming to us with a firm sense of what that looks like by the application deadline. If there are some ideas or, firm preferences that an applicant would like to build into their application, I think that certainly speaks to, I think, the level of thought that they've given it, but please don't be intimidated by that aspect of things. I think that's part of working through this and in helping provide, I think, some guidance and resources for that initial cohort in the Digital Navigator program.
I can add to that just a small piece. Sorry.
How is a community generally to learn of the existence of a digital nation or the navigator his or herself?
First of all, I don't know if there was a comment you wanted to get in, Paulo. Otherwise, please feel free to take your first stab at that question too while you're talking.
Oh yeah, no, I just to include on the question about like about screen sharing software. I mean I think you nailed it, Matt. Like there's no marriage to any one particular software, like whether it's Zoom, Google Meet, what have you. Like the best answer, and this is like something that's integrated and imbued with the sorts of trainings that digital navigators get, is that the best software for screen sharing is the one that works best for your community member, right? Like the whole thing is like you always want to meet them where they are. So like a digital navigator will need to have like that flexibility and that understanding to work with different types of platforms.
Nancy, I regret to say I have time for one more question today, and I'll have to depart. And so if there are questions that are posed in the chat box that we don't get to in the webinar today, we'll capture those questions and we'll be sure to include them in an FAQ document posted on our website.
Sounds good. We did have another great question about how ICGP grants have been set up to help wireless providers so far, and small telcos are losing out in that sort of mix. And so do you have ideas that would help this process to get fiber to the home? I think this is probably from a rural participant, if you wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important question. I guess, I think, I think it's best that I punt on that right now. It's a pretty big question. And I think, for the purposes of our digital navigator, program, I think the idea here is that we want to create resources at the local level that, that help communities identify their strengths, their gaps, and align, resources existing or proposed to help fill those gaps. And some of those gaps might be on the infrastructure front, but this program is probably going to make the most difference for a lot of community members on the adoption and utilization front, building those skills. And so while going through this program might help unearth where there are some access gaps, I think the immediate benefit for a community or for a participant is going to be on that adoption, that skills building, that utilization front. And so I hope that helps folks. And we have we'll have more webinars down the road that might be more focused on infrastructure or digital equity that I'd love to get into some of these questions that remain. Otherwise, we'll capture those questions that are in the chat box and make sure that we give them good treatment for an FAQ document. And I do apologize that I have to run. Otherwise, Nancy, I thank you again for helping us run another great webinar. And if anyone does have any questions about this opportunity, please don't hesitate to contact us at broadband@illinois.gov.
Well, thanks again, Matt, and thanks to everybody for participating today. And we hope you have a good rest of your day and a good weekend. And I'll be sending out an email with all of the helpful links that we saw today in the chat box, as well as some helpful links from the site. So thank you again.
Thanks for having us. Thanks so much.